Okay, we're talking to Ivan O'Brien here from O'Brien Press from Dublin. We're at the Frankfurt Book Fair. Are you having a good fair so far, Ivan?
An excellent fair so far, yeah. It's really, really good. Lots of interest. Very busy, talking all the time. Haven't quite lost my voice yet, so it's all good.
That sounds good. Now, I want to ask you about the history of your firm because you've got a very good history with your firm. We've had an interview recently in the Irish Independent, and that shed some light on the origins of the O'Brien Press. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, every company needs a good backstory, a bit of a mythology built around it. The company came out of a printing company, actually. My grandfather was a printer working for himself. He ran many businesses because he had to, because he was a communist. And if you were a communist in Ireland, no one would give you a job. So you had to employ yourself. And most of Ireland's communists ended up being small businessmen as a result. And he was one of them. And he printed for a lot of people, did a lot of things, but he felt that the communist story in Ireland was undersold and started commissioning people to write biographies of notable Irish communists and then producing them. And after a while realised that this was really publishing, not printing, and decided with his son, my father, to formalise that and create a publishing company. And so they did that. The first book they published was written in Mountjoy Jail. Every week my father would go in, give Eamon Macamosh a new lump of paper and a new pencil and take what he'd written the previous week out between the bars and set it. So we were kind of fairly radical from the start, and also we were selling a story about Ireland that hadn't been told before. Nobody published books in Ireland, or very, very few people published books in Ireland until the early 70s. All the booksellers told us it can't be done. There won't be an audience. All the good books come from London. Why would you bother? Anyone who's good, they're going to go to London to get published. But we knew that was wrong. And we started talking about Irish history, Irish biography, geography, different groups. You know, one of our first books was called Tinkers and Travellers, about the itinerant population in Ireland, a real in-depth analysis of where they sit within society. A lot of serious things that had never, ever been addressed before.
Can you remember any particular period where there was like hardship, or, I mean, if you're being a communist in Ireland at that time, it was not an easy thing to be. You were definitely set against the system. Can you remember any particular thing, incident or period that was particularly hard or troublesome?
Well, I think that period was gone by the time I came along, thankfully. Yeah, not really. It doesn't really apply to me, but we were always outsiders, always a bit different. My genealogy is bizarre and random. So, you know, when you're sitting within a society feeling like an outsider, you always have a slightly different perspective. And, you know, the fact that we loved our art and our literature and our history and our being slightly strange allowed us to do things that maybe seemed a bit strange or a bit risky, and that helps when you're in an industry like publishing, where if you just try doing the same thing again and again, eventually it gets boring. You got to try new stuff. You got to try new perspectives, and that's what we've always tried to do.
Okay. Well, was there any particular turning point for the company in that long journey you've taken there? Was there one book perhaps that was a turning point or something like that?
There were a couple of significant turning points. I was involved in the second, not the first. The first turning point would have been in the late 80s, when a conscious decision was made that we should make money. Which may seem truly bizarre in retrospect, that a company should have to consciously decide that. But before that, it wasn't really a focus at all. We just kind of did what we did, and there was enough there just about to pay the wages and to make the company work, so we kept doing it. But then we thought, actually, for us to survive, we need to be commercial in some sense. The second major transition, I suppose, was when we published a book in 1990 called Under the Hawthorn Tree, which was a children's story set in the famine, where babies die and lots of other people die. And we were told, you can't put that in a children's book. No one wants to hear about it. But we thought, actually, the story for children has absolutely not been told. When I was growing up, I read about White Cliffs, cucumber sandwiches, jolly good shows, and all this stuff, which was not the Irish experience. And we realised when Under the Hawthorn Tree was received as amazingly well as it was, that there was a huge amount of storytelling that absolutely had to be done. It was really important, and we set out to tell Irish history, Irish life to Irish children, which is really important for national identity. If you grow up only reading about other places, you don't know who you are yourself. And so we became a children's publisher.
No, because that hits a chord. Because I remember myself growing up, there was that thing that we all read, Enid Blyton, for example, and other authors, Irish authors, have mentioned the same thing. And I think that's also something that's very important. At that period, there came a lot of books that were Irish orientated with that history that you're speaking of.
Yeah, and the thing was, there were an enormous number of writers just waiting to write those stories, but they just hadn't been asked. So after we published that, a whole swathe of excellent writers who'd been caught up in their attics wanting to write those things and not had the chance just appeared and came to us. And before we knew it, we kind of had a literary canon of children's books, which was absolutely fantastic. And, you know, a little bit of support from the Arts Council, a lot of support from teachers, from librarians, from parents who realised that these were really, really important things to do, meant that we were able to develop into a significant children's publisher. And that tied into something that we'd been doing right since the very start. When the company was very young and only had 3 or 4 books, we came to the Frankfurt Book Fair. Michael tells an amazing story of how he came to the end of the fair, having wandered around for days, wondering, why am I here? What is going on? I have these things, no one wants them, there are all these amazing books for everywhere, it's a total disaster, I'll never do this again. And at a party, just before going home basically, he was sitting depressed in a corner and a guy came over to him and they started chatting, and it turned out that he was from a Canadian publisher with a particular interest in Ireland. And I mean, one of the books that I mentioned earlier, Tinkers and Travellers, the author of that had been a student of his in a previous college they'd been in, so he had to publish that. And we also had a book on the Blasket Islands, and he had to publish that because he had a particular interest in that. So from total failure, it went to 100% success at the flip of a switch, basically. And we've been coming to book fairs ever since. And children's books travel better than anything else. First of all, you're telling our stories to the rest of the world. So it's really important culturally for the country, as well as for our authors. Also for the company, it helps to bring in more money without having to make more books, which is always great for any publishing company. But it's really important for Ireland. You know, you can read about, to get back to Under the Hawthorn Tree, you can read the story of the Irish famine in Chinese, in Japanese, in Mexico. They've sold about 20 editions of it. It's available in 10 or 12 countries. And that's really, really important as an understanding of us travelling to the world. And that is ever more important in the company. And when we had the economic crash in 2008, we had some really strong books in other markets in 2009, 2010, 2011. So export, book fairs, internationalization was critical for our survival at that time.
Okay, so it sounds like Irish literature is well able to travel today as much as it was before.
Absolutely, yeah.
Annie, your plans for the future or your thoughts for the future?
More the same, only better. Now, there's a transition, a change this year, I think, for the last 5 or 6 or 8 years, if you do the sums. Everyone in Ireland has been running faster to stand still, and it's been incredibly tough. This year, more people seem to be buying books, both Irish people and visitors to Ireland. And in the fair as a whole, I think the same message is coming worldwide. There's a new positivity in the publishing industry that people are willing to pay money to buy really well-told and well-presented stories, be that fiction or non-fiction. And so, you know, the publishing industry is here to stay. There'll be a lot more bumps along the road. Stuff will change. It's not like we're going back to where we were. It's a new normal. It's not the old normal back again. It'll never be like that. But it's positive. And we still have some great writers, and we're going to keep on publishing them, keep telling stories.
Ivan O'Brien, thanks for sharing your thoughts with us here at the Frankfurt International Book Fair.
Thanks very much.